Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, mathematicians. I am going to be recording a little tutorial on graphing. I'm not sure how long this is going to work, so I may have to wind up doing a second video. Let's get started. First of all, of course, you got to turn it on. Here's our on button right here down on the very bottom of the left-hand side. We've got our cursor up. That's a great sign. We want to go ahead and put in our function. I'm assuming that we have a function that we're trying to work with. I'm going to put in 2 of them, assuming that my calculator wants to work here. Okay, thanks for hanging in there with the technical difficulties here. Alright, so y equals, and I'm going to put in 2 of the most simple equations that we can work with. One is going to be y equals x, and then I'm going to have y equals x squared. So my x value is right here. It's 2 over, second one down from the left-hand side. Alright, so we're going to do our x, and then I'm going to arrow down, and I'm going to do an x, and I can do squared here, or I can do the up arrow thing, that's the caret, and put in 2. So I'm going to just use this right here so it's quick and simple. Alright, so now I've got this in there. I can go ahead and graph, and you can see we've got our graphs quite nicely. If you're not sure which one's which, say you're facing a couple of really different kind of functions, or you have 2 lines or 2 parabolas and you're trying to keep track of which one is which, the way we would go about doing that is to change up our y equals, what that actually looks like. Here you can see on the front end here we have these dash, kind of very thin lines. I'm going to arrow over, and now I've got my flashing cursor on my line. I'm going to hit enter once, and that will give me a nice solid line. Really nice dark line. So now I can go ahead and graph. So you can see that that line is a lot thicker than it was before. Here we have our line going through. Our parabola is still nice and thin line, right? So it's real easy to distinguish between the two types of functions, or the two functions. You, in theory, could have up to 4, 5, 6 functions going on at one time. At this point, I'm going to keep it simple. We're just going to keep it to 2. I am going to change up our formula though here a little bit in just a moment. I want to point out that this is -10 to +10, and then this is from -y to -10y to +10y. So I am going to want to change things up here. If I do an x plus, let's do x plus 10. Alright, so now my y-intercept is going to be 10. And see, we don't have a whole lot going on over here. We don't know, if we were looking for the 2 intersections of this line, I can only see one of them right now. So what we need to do is go into our window and take a look. And my x values seem relatively okay. I don't think I need to change them. My width of the screen is just fine. I am going to change, though, my y values. And I could change my -10 to something smaller, something, closer to 0, I should say, absolute value of being smaller. Or I can go down here and change my y max to something larger, and in either case it's going to change how this thing looks. So let me go, I'm going to put in 50 just to kind of make this a really big deal. The other thing I want to point out is we've got our x scale and our y scale. Right now we've got that as intervals of 1. That means that there's a little tick mark for each one that's on there. Now take a look here. We've got from -10 to 50. That's 60 spaces, 60 units on my y-axis. So let's go ahead and graph that. And as you can see, first of all, we have, if we're looking for just those two intersections, that might be a little overkill. All right. And if you take a look here, you can't tell how far apart those dashes are, right? The little tick marks in order to tell us what is 1, what is 2. We can't see that because it's all squished together. So let's go back in here, and I'm going to change my window. I am going to change my window down to, for my Y max, let's make that a 25. Oops, 35. Nope. I want 25. 25. And then I'm going to change my Y scale to 5. So that way it's only going up by, it'll leave a tick mark for every 5th one. The fact that I've changed this to 25 will help, but this will also make it really clear where our tick marks are. Remember, you're allowed to do that. You can have one across the bottom, across the x-axis, and you can have whatever you want along the y-axis. That makes sense as long as you keep them consistent within the specific axis. In this case, it's not possible to mess that up because we're just using the calculator to tell us. So go ahead and graph. All right, that's a lot better. We can kind of see the whole line here, right? It looks like we've got most of that taken care of. And we could see both of our intersections. So one is there and one is there. Now, if we wanted to find our intersections, there's a couple of things we could do. One is we can zoom in, and we would use our zoom, right? And if I go to zoom in, and it's asking me where do I want to be, well, let's say -3. Hang on. Let me quit out of here. That's not what I meant to do. All right, so graph. Nope. Graph. All right, and I wanted to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to use my arrows here, I think. Yep, here we go. So I can move this cursor around anywhere within the screen. I can actually move it off the screen, although that's not particularly helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here, and it's going to zoom in on that particular section. And here we can zoom in, we can arrow over, right? And see where we're at. Now, there may be a little bit of a difference between the two functions even when we get really close. If you take a look here, we are on one of them, and let's go trace. All right, so there's my first one. I can arrow over along that. I'm going to get close, but not exactly on it, just so that we can see what happens when we're not exactly there. So we have these two values, right? This almost -3 and 7. And then I'm going to use my up arrow because I'm going to switch between my Y1 and my Y2. If you take a look right there, we shifted from the Y1 to Y2. They are clearly not on the same spot. All right. Here we have almost a 9. This stayed the same. It was nearly 3 before. It uses our X values. So let's say, okay, we've gotten close. We know it's kind of in the ballpark. We want to get real specific though. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in and we're going to go to CALC, and that's above the trace. So we're going to go second and then go to our trace button to get to the CALC. And here we are given a bunch of things. Now, from 6 and 7 on, that's more, like calculus type things, and you don't need to worry about those just yet. We can find out what the value is. We can find out where the zeros are, where it crosses the x-axis. We can find our minimum, which is helpful if we're looking at something like a quadratic or a sine wave. You can find a maximum, again, ideal for quadratics or other wavy lines. wavy curves. Here's what the intersection, here's what we're actually going to use. I want to find out where these two exactly meet. So I'm going to select 5. And my first curve is, it's asking me, is this my first curve that I'm interested in? Now remember, I could have like 6, 7, 8 of these in here. And if I only want to look at 2 for an intersection, I need to be real specific about which ones it is. In this case, we only have the 2, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And now it's asking me, is this the second curve? And I'm going to say, yes, it is. We're going to go down to enter. And our guess, you can go ahead and put a guess in there. I'm going to say negative 2.5. 2.5. See, it's going to say, okay, what is my x value? When I put in a value like that, it's going to look for my x to be that value. So I'm going to go ahead and enter. Oh, what did I do? I used the wrong sign, didn't I? I used the subtraction sign rather than the minus sign. So here I'm going to go ahead and change that to a minus sign, and I'm going to go ahead and graph. Right, go ahead and enter. And it tells me my intersection is at negative 2.70 and 7.798. So I would say probably 7.3 and negative 2.7, because this sometimes with the rounding it can get a little off. So that's one way to be able to check things. All right. The closer you are to a number, right, the smaller these are, then the better the fit is. So certainly if I were to say round at 2 decimal places, you would have negative 2.7, and here you'd have 7.3, because this 8 would round the 9 up. Well, so then I would wind up having that next one bounce up as well. So it'd be 7.3. Or 7.30. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. Enter, and I'm going to enter. Now, if you take a look, I'm a little off center. I'm still over here, right? If I wanted to go back to my actual, centered kind of thing, I would go to the Z standard, which is 6. And now it's going to go back to my 10 and 10, right? So this is my negative 10 down here on the Y. Here's my positive 10 on the Y. Here's my negative 10 on the X. And here's my positive 10 on the X. I would go back in. I could go change my window. And I'm going to go back to the 25 here, right? I want that to be my 25. And then we said 5 for our tick marks. Enter, and go ahead and grab. So there we go again. Alright, so this is kind of a really quick tutorial on how to do a lot of the graphing. I will say that there's one other thing you should probably be aware of. There is a thing called a stat plot. And when you are working with a stat plot and you have a graph going on, it's possible that the two will argue with each other, and you'll get an error. And you'll be able to tell when that happens when we have, no, it's not going to let me do it here. I don't remember exactly where the stat plot is. But anyway, I can go back out to, let's go to my y equals. Here's another. There's plot 1. Now, here I turned it on, and in this case it probably will, yep, it did give us an invalid dimension, right? So here we've got an error. It's not that there's an error in any of the functions that you put in, it's the fact that we have both the plot, the stat plot on as well as. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of here. I'm going to clear that. I'm going to go back to my y equals, and I'm going to go up to my plot 1, and I'm going to turn that off. And then, there we go, it's off now. And now I can go back and I can graph. It's going to graph just nicely for me. Alright, so one other thing, for my calc, I can calculate the minimum. I could do that. I will, I think I will talk about that here in a little bit. I think I have kind of overrun what I was intending for this video.